that inner core of you, which is, that little bit of God, that's what you use to make the other things go right. Or if you don't do that, they're going to go wrong, inevitably.
If you could find someone, maybe the position I was in when I was 18, didn't know what to do, is there a list or like 3, 4, 5 of these things that you would give to them that you'd say, follow these and it will get you in a good position? Welcome back to the Everyday Stoic with myself, William Mulligan, the Everyday Stoic. Joining me today is Gregory Sadler, who is an author, speaker, professor and editor of Stoicism Today. He has taught philosophy, Stoicism, practical philosophy, practical Stoicism to nurses, teachers, businessmen, and prisoners in a high security facility. He is teaching philosophy and Stoicism as a way to improve your life, and he has helped many people through these methods. He picked up a lot of his philosophy in the army, and that has transferred over his incredible and very successful career as a philosopher. Today's episode is powered by Huel, which is a quick, affordable, nutritiously complete food with everything that your body needs. I hope you enjoy today's talk. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I just don't think a lot of people realize you can actually change your life and your circumstances. And they're stuck in like this way. And I think philosophy for me was the key to going, I can shape my life.
Yeah, there's quite a few, you could call them insights that are very liberating. And like you mentioned, that things don't have to be exactly the way that they've been. I think a lot of people don't get that. And, when you point that out to them, later on, they're like, well, how the hell did I not know that?
Yeah.
But, you know, if you've been preached to that things just are a certain way and, um, everybody else has reinforced that around you, I suppose it's difficult to get out of that.
Yeah, I think you just get stuck. You only know what you know. Like for most of
Yeah.
till I was like 18 maybe, I only knew life as a certain way. And to me, that life was that I'm sort of downtrodden and life is rubbish. I don't have confidence, don't have ability to do things. And then I started realizing like, it's all just rubbish. I can kind of do what I want.
I had a similar thing that happened, but it was younger. I was one of those people who, constantly felt like others around me were paying attention and perhaps judging me. And so I needed to not only be on my best behavior, but like make it clear what I was doing and what my intentions were. And I remember how liberating it was to realize that not only do most people not pay attention to 90% of the things going on around them, including you, but most people don't care either. Their lives are busy enough that they're not interested in what some, you know, 13-year-old kid who they've never met is doing while on the train or in a museum or pick whatever else. So that was very helpful for me.
Yeah, I mean, I was learning about your story recently, and I can't remember what video I was watching, but you basically skimmed over it and you said you've explained it enough times so no one really needs to know. But I would like to hear your story from sort of the age maybe where you discovered philosophy and explain, I heard about like police, not police, prisoners, the army. It sounds like a very interesting story.
Yeah, and it's very much a bunch of random things strung together. Unlike a lot of people who work in the field of philosophy, who went into it with a kind of plan and may have had some people who could tell them what to do, gave them good advice or what seemed like good advice, at least at the time. I encountered philosophy in we could talk about philosophy in the very broad sense where it's thinking about things and doing so in a way that tries to be rigorous and consistent and all that. And then you can do that not taking a philosophy class, but taking a good writing class or a good history class or having conversations with your family members or friends or things like that. But then I also did get exposed here and there to philosophy. I had two classes in high school both of which were religion electives. And the first one was Intro to Philosophy, and it was just terrible. We read Martin Gardner's The Whys of a Philosophical Scrivener. So no primary text, no reading actual philosophers, just this guy who wrote for Scientific American, and it was really quite boring. And the teacher was really dry and boring too, and kind of a disciplinarian. So that could have turned me off on philosophy altogether. And then I had this other class that wasn't supposed to be a philosophy class. And unfortunately for her, but fortunately for me, the nun who was supposed to teach it, it was a sacraments class. She got sick and died. So they brought in this guy very last minute, didn't hire him back the next year, I think, because there were complaints about him. And he was this little monkish guy named Mr. Lorenzo, and he'd had an Augustinian conversion, and so he loved St. Augustine, and he wanted to tell us all about him. And he was like, "Well, if I'm going to teach you about Augustine and his views on the sacraments, first we have to study Plato and Aristotle." And he threw out the textbook. I mean, it was almost like something out of a movie, you know, these people throwing away the textbook. And he would just write things on the board and lecture and then ask us questions. And we were invited to debate things. And so most of the students just hated it because they were all these go-getter college prep kids. They wanted to know what's on the examination so they could, get through the class and get credentialed and get out of there. But I loved it. And so he was teaching in a philosophical way, and he was teaching some philosophy stuff. And then, no follow up whatsoever with that. I read a few philosophy books here and there. My uncle had Camus' Myth of Sisyphus, and I read it and didn't understand most of it at that age. And then I read some Nietzsche and thought that was really cool stuff. But looking back on it, probably didn't know most of what was going on in the work. And then I went in the army, and you would have these interesting conversations about things with people in the army. I was a combat engineer, so most of the people that I was in with were not particularly bright. Combat arms, it tends to be like that. But there were a lot of more intellectual guys who had been in other fields, and they were like non-commissioned officers, sergeants, and people like that. And if you transferred, so if you wanted to advance, you could advance more quickly in the engineers than you could, say, in finance or chemicals or stuff like that. So you'd have these smart guys who came in from the outside, and you chat with them about stuff about life, and what are you going to do after you get out, and just all sorts of things like that. And you're effectively doing some philosophy that way. And then I got out and I started working in restaurants because that was something I knew how to do. And quickly I started thinking, this is not for me. I don't want to be doing this the rest of my life. I guess I will go to college. And I was effectively what we call over here in the States a first generation college student. My mother had gone to college, but she dropped out to marry my dad, who had actually gotten his degree in accountancy, and he became a CPA, and he went on to law school. But he died when I was 11, so he wasn't there to give me any guidance whatsoever. So I didn't have any idea how you apply to college or about, the entire prestige system that we have or all that. I was lucky I had good test scores. And so I could have really applied anywhere and probably gotten in because they like test scores. And so I applied to this little rinky-dink college that my mother's boyfriend at the time had graduated from, and so he suggested I should go there, and they accepted me immediately and gave me some scholarships because I was bringing the test scores up. Plus, I was a veteran. And one of my mother's former boyfriends, a guy who was sort of like a surrogate father to me, he had told me, okay, when you get to college, the first thing you need to do is declare a major immediately, because then you're not just any old freshman in a whole sea of new students. You'll get to know some professors and they can give you some guidance. And, like most advice I've gotten in my life, okay, that worked out good for me. Probably not everybody should do that. you know,
Yeah.
but so I saw philosophy on this list, and I was like, philosophy sounds cool. I'll do that. And so they put me in an intro to philosophy class. And then the next semester I took ethics. And then you start taking your history stuff. And Meanwhile, I was also studying mathematics in a similar accidental way. I'd been put in a calculus class and I liked it, so I just kept taking classes. And so that's basically what ended up happening. I had no plans of like becoming a professor or anything. And I finished up and then I worked for about a year, just, barista in a cafe and a third shift security guard, which let me have a lot of time for exercise and reading. And then I decided to go to graduate school. And again, I had no idea where I should apply or anything. My professors, when I was an undergrad, I won't say they were worthless, but they were certainly burnt out, didn't care, hadn't like looked at the field. So they couldn't give me any useful advice. So I just applied to different places. The one that gave me the most money, I went there. It was Southern Illinois University, and it turned out to be a great place for me, but it's not necessarily a great place in general. It just happened to be a good place for me because they had an amazing research library, and so I had lots of access to free books, and cost of living was low, and there were good classes I could take with professors who I enjoyed hanging out with, and good graduate students. And I didn't have any sort of plan of what I was doing. I ended up writing my dissertation on a rather obscure French Catholic philosopher, Maurice Blondel, which was not a great career move. I should have written on somebody more famous and all of that. But I just wasn't interested in that, in part because nobody told me I should be. Or the people who did were so, they're from like, higher up institutions. And I had this, you might say, distrust. I mean, a distrust that I could say carries through my life. So when you're in the army and you're enlisted, you distrust your officers, right?
Right.
Because they're not with you. They're a different kind of people, and they're not looking out for you, with rare exceptions. And when you work in a restaurant, the boss, he's not looking out for you. He wants to make money, and it's your fellow people that you hang out with. So, big names or having gone to fancy places not only has never impressed me, but I have a sort of almost instinctive that I have to overcome distrust of those people when they're recommending things to me. And fortunately, I've gotten past that, but I think there was probably a lot of rebelliousness in
Yeah.
my decision-making process where, well, if they're recommending that, it's got to be crap. I'm not going to do that. I'll do something else instead, or I'll do what they're doing, but I'll find a different way to do it. And so I've just been extraordinarily lucky, you could say. First of all, that I even found work at all, given the path that I took, and that I happened to have, good students and colleagues, and read the things that I came across. And once I get into graduate school, I started being a little bit more thoughtful and systematic about, okay, I should really learn this. And that was helped out by the fact that we used to have a very, very rigorous set of examinations that they've gotten rid of because too many people were flunking them. And they would give you these massive reading lists. And so, you could try to game the examination by just studying bits and pieces of it and hoping that you would get questions on that. Or you could just read everything that was on there. And doing so really helped me become a good teacher, because you had to read all the thinkers that you otherwise might have skipped over because you didn't think they were very interesting. And so spending time with them, you'd come to appreciate them. And then when I got my first teaching positions, where I was teaching intro to philosophy or ethics, or these what we call service classes to non-philosophy majors, that's the being thrown into the combat zone, and having your baptism under fire, as opposed to moving into a much more prestigious thing where you just teach graduate students. Graduate students are easy to teach. They already care about what you're doing, and you just send them off to the library to do some research and make them do some presentations, and then give them some feedback on it. Telling business majors and nursing majors and fashion majors that Plato can actually improve their lives, that's a hard sell. And so you have to get very, very good at making the case about why they should care at all about this stuff that is in a class that they didn't want to take in the first place, you know. So that was very, very helpful for me. And you mentioned the prison, my first full-time teaching position, not my full-time, my first teaching. I taught classes at a community college and at my university, but my first full-time teaching position was in a maximum security prison, and it was good for me because that was a tough audience, and I had to really develop my skills in explaining things to people who might not be all that interested in it or well prepared for it. So you come up with examples that people can relate to and talk about, the implications of even seemingly very abstract things to people's lives. And it was very rewarding. But unfortunately, it ended because the state of Indiana, during the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, they got rid of prison education. Um, but it's coming back here and there in different places. We have a program here in Wisconsin, which is only online, unfortunately. But it's called the Second Chance Pell Program, and the Pell grants pay for it. It's a federal thing here in the United States, and it's a sign that maybe things will get a little bit better in terms of prison education. And then, I've kind of bounced around. I had a full-time position down in Fayetteville State, left that when I was up for early promotion and tenure, and I was actually running a university-wide assessment to go up to New York and ultimately marry my wife, who was at the Culinary Institute of America. And so since then, I've just been teaching as an adjunct, as a part-timer for various institutions. But I also do things on the side, like, the YouTube videos and
I mean, yeah, it
publishing a blog.
looks you upload so many YouTube videos. So I mean, you must be busy with that.
Yeah, it's about one a day at this
Yeah.
point. And
And for a long time as well.
so I think it's 13 years now. And so it looks like a lot, but when you think about it spread over a number of years, then it becomes much more manageable. So,
Yeah.
plus there's a learning curve, right? So when you do something for the first time, so let's take culinary stuff, right? Cooking eggs, you think cooking eggs is very easy, but to make them very good, there's some skill involved, right? And the first couple times that you do it, okay, you break them, they look like crap, you go through a lot of eggs, it takes you longer than somebody who's been doing it for a while. But once you've done it for a couple weeks, you can just like crank it out like that. And so I'm not saying that I just grind the videos out like that, but a lot of the production parts, I've learned how to do it quickly. I can just get
Yeah.
up to the chalkboard and start writing some things and talking about it. Whereas, 10 years ago, it took me a lot longer to produce these things. There's a lot of like little technical things, like how to use the software, what to do when YouTube inevitably screws something up and demonetizes one of your videos, or there's all these things that you learn along the way that you don't necessarily master, but you get to an experienced level, and that helps out quite a bit.
Yeah. So you was saying about because I have a similar thought. You were saying about it's easier to teach the students philosophy because they are there for philosophy, but then people like nurses and prisoners, they don't want it. And when I was younger, I was interested in philosophy, but
Yeah.
as soon as I looked at it, I was like, right, I don't, this makes no sense, can't understand any of this. I can't go to college, forget it. And then I read the Meditations, I've actually got it here, and
Okay.
I didn't know it was philosophy. I just got recommended it so much, started reading it, and I was like, this is changing my life. And then I sort of started looking more. And for like a long time, I was like studying philosophy without realizing it. And my personal belief is that I guess it's like the philosophy for life is like philosophy is there to be able to help the ordinary person, but they're also they're the person that's not interested in philosophy.
Oh yeah, but
But
it takes either you have to have somebody like a guide who can help you out with that, who can open things up for you. And it doesn't have to be a teacher. It could be like, your uncle or, some person that you chat with on the bus who you see day after day, but they've got to make the case existentially for you that these ideas somehow have something to do with your life. And I think that's perfectly fair because, there's a lot of people in philosophy who act as if, oh, if you're not interested in this wonderful millennia old discipline, you're not really thoughtful or an intellectual. It's as if it sells itself. And that's a terrible way to go about it. I mean, if you think about the way we make other life decisions, why should you study history? Something that we did get in our primary and secondary school. And it could be very boring. People have to make a case for it. Or why should you learn how to cook an egg well? Why should you learn how to cook for yourself? People have to show you the advantages of it, and it's got to stick for you. It's interesting that you mentioned the meditations because I read that early on as a philosophy major. And because I was kind of a tough guy back then, I was very attracted to the idea of like toughness
Yeah.
and, you can overcome things. And he was, a military commander. And all the stuff about like virtue went totally over my head.
Yeah, I had the exact same thing. Yeah.
It took a long time for me to catch on why these other matters that are being discussed in there could be useful, but I wasn't ready for it. I had to like sort of be opened up, you could say, before I could appreciate it. And that's probably the case for you as well, I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
I think that's like obviously people it's the misconception of stoicism basically, but that's the thing that attracted me to like at the time I did feel weak and life was rubbish and I wanted to be like a stronger person and seeing Marcus Aurelius and like the stories I heard from him on the internet, I thought this guy holds the answers for me and it took me a long
Yeah.
time to go like um I'm in this for the wrong reason in a way, but I suppose I wasn't because it did help me and it took me to a, a better place in my life, I suppose.
That makes complete sense. And very often we come in and study something in philosophy that's worth studying for what are ultimately the wrong reasons, but if it gets us into it, then it kind of is the right reason at the time in a qualified way, right? Um, so, for example, I when I was in undergraduate and grad school, I loved to argue with people, and I was a pretty mean arguer, sort of no holds barred. I loved getting into things where I could find somebody else who was willing to be as ruthless as I was. And I was, frankly, kind of a prick. And I can ask, well, what was motivating me? Well, it was, and this is where philosophy can help out. It was clearly a desire for what Plato identified as um, thumos, satisfying this part of us that wants social status, honor, to strive against other people. And, that's not necessarily bad. Plato found a way to talk about how we could harness that energy and turn it to good, but left to its own devices, it'll screw us up. And so there were a lot of philosophers who I studied and then could argue about because I wanted to excel in that way. Not a good motive, but it led me to reading people. And then I could shift from that to a desire to understand truth and to be a better person and all that. So the key there is, do you make that transition, right? Or do you just stay in the original thing? And it's interesting because so reading Marcus Aurelius, not going to screw you up. There's a lot of popularizers of Stoicism out there who I think will give you a mistaken viewpoint on it, and you don't want to stick with them. So somebody who's sort of in between those two would be Ryan Holiday. He's, done a lot of great service in attracting people's attention to Stoicism, but he's got some things wrong and he publishes mistranslations on his site every once in a while and doesn't check it. So obviously not that concerned with truth, which, makes sense. He's a marketing guy. He tells you straight out, that's what I do. And I see a lot of people in Stoic groups who they'll post something, and then somebody will say, "Well, you should get past Ryan Holiday and read the actual Stoic texts. Read Seneca, read Epictetus, read Marcus, read Musonius. Or if you're going to read secondary stuff, read good people, John Sellers or Donald Robertson or people like that." And they'll say, "Well, I feel a sense of loyalty because he's the person who got me into Stoicism." And you could be like, well, that's fine. But that doesn't mean that you have to stick with him as if he's your friend. He's not. He doesn't know who the hell you are. You're not hurting him if you don't read and reference him. You've already bought his book. So you've already done everything you're going to do for the guy. Um, why not move on to something that's better for you? And so, what's behind that? It's something good, which is this sense of loyalty to those who have helped us in the past, but it's something that winds up being counterproductive. It's sort of like having, a friend who you went to high school with and they helped you out back then through a tough time. Maybe something bad happened in your life. You went through a terrible breakup, or I don't know, you were going to get beaten up and they jumped in and, scared off these guys who were going after you. That doesn't mean that you have to stay friends with them and put up with their nonsense the rest of your life. Right. You get to, as you mature, you get to decide who you want to keep hanging out with. Sometimes you got to leave people who were benefactors to you in the past behind so that you can go on to better things. And if they really, really like you, they'd be happy with that. If they want to hang on to you, now you got a sign that, you know, they want to hold you back. And so I think, and not just with Stoicism, but you could say this with all sorts of things, you could, you can get a lot out of many different philosophical traditions or schools or methodologies. And you don't have to be beholden to the very first book that you read on it, or the first person who introduced you to it. As a matter of fact, maybe they want you to go beyond them.
Yeah, I think I was so stuck in just reading the meditations, was reading it for years, going over it,
Mm.
and then I went on to just like the discourses, and then reading a lot of Seneca, and I kind of just got stuck there. And I mean, not recently, but it was a bit a while after. I thought, let's read some modern day writers, and it was only until I started reading, like you said, Donald Robertson, I was like, hold on, there's more to Stoicism than what I'm seeing
Yeah.
here. And I went back to the early Stoa, and I'm reading about the early Stoa, and then I'm sort of, but well, actually, something I'd like to ask you is how the late Stoa, what was their understanding of Stoicism in comparison to the early Stoa?
Oh, I mean, it was always a school in development to some degree, right? So even in Zeno's first group of students, there were some who viewed things different ways, right? And then each of the scholarchs after them, like with the idea of living in accordance with nature, Zeno didn't talk about that. He talked about living in accordance, and then it's the later early guys who are like living in accordance with nature, and here's what that means, and then here's another add-on to that. So it was always cumulative, you could say, and it was always saying like, well, we need to think about new circumstances that we're in. And the other thing that's kind of cool as you're moving, you've got the early Stoa, and they're engaging with the culture and the other schools of their time. By the time you get to the middle Stoa, you've got these guys who we have fragments of, um, Panatius and Posidonius, and they are willing to say, maybe we went too far with some of these things. Like, Aristotle and Plato say a lot of good stuff about friendship or the parts of the soul. Maybe we need to revise our thinking with respect to that. And then there were always like stick in the mud. We call them Orthodox Stoics, who are like, you are no longer a Stoic because you have abandoned the master's decrees, right? And then we get into later Roman times, and that's what we have most of the literature from. We've got lots of Seneca, good bit of Epictetus. I will say too, I just reviewed a book that'll the review will be coming out, and it's one of the very negative reviews that I have to give. There is this thing that's called the Golden Sayings of Epictetus. not really Epictetus. It's
Okay.
something that was published in the early 20th century, sort of like cobbling together bits and pieces with some old-fashioned language, but somehow people get the idea that they should read that instead of reading the Enchiridion and discourses, which they shouldn't. But then, we've got Marcus and we've got Musonius Rufus and some others, and they're doing something within the Roman Empire. So of course there's examples like, do you kiss up to Caesar? Do you want to be a Roman procurator? All that kind of stuff. But they're also thinking, well, how do you live out this thing that now has been going on for, um, eh, depending on who you're picking, 300, 400 years, and has proven successful. And they're writing in different circumstances. Marcus, he's writing to himself. He's not writing to us. Seneca is explicitly writing to his buddy Lucilius, or consolation letters to people who have just had a terrible loss, or he writes a bunch of treatises. Epictetus, he's teaching, and his student is writing some of this stuff down from memory afterwards. Musonius is lecturing. So all of those people are they're innovating in some respects, and then they're also trying to remain true to this tradition in other respects. So Epictetus, who, it's hard to get more orthodox than him, but he introduces new ideas that aren't there in the early Stoa, like proiresis. Proiresis for them is just one kind of impulse. For him, that's the absolute center of your being. And it's pretty close to what we nowadays call the will. You know, that's a massive change, but he manages to make it fit. Sort of like musicians, right? You can have a musician who belongs to a particular genre, and then they introduce a couple new distinctive things, and it's gotta harmonize. It's gotta fit in there. And when they do that, you get something really awesome. If you just kind of throw stuff together, maybe not so much. And we don't have those guys. Nobody bothered to keep copying out their texts. We only have like the best hits, you could say, from that time. Somebody had to be bothered to actually take a book and copy it line by line, or else it didn't get reproduced. So
Yeah, I mean that's what I like about them is you can see that they hold this like Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Musonius Rufus. They hold the same sort of core idea, but they're teaching it in a completely different way, and maybe their understandings was completely different as well. Um, but when you start to like you said, once you're changing author, you're reading different people, you start to get like a broader understanding. And especially for me, I see it more as like a practical thing. So I like philosophy for the idea of improving people's lives and improving my own
yeah.
life. And when I'm reading them and getting different ideas, I'm like, oh, Epictetus maybe seems a way too extreme, and people won't listen to some of the stuff he's saying because you hear some of his quotes and you'll be like, I don't know if I can like kiss my wife and child goodnight and like say that they're mortal. But like once you get a brief understanding of all of them, I think you get a understanding of what it means to be a Stoic, I think.
Yeah, and there's some things that are culturally conditioned as well. So Epictetus would say that I'm a good guy, but you're not. Why? Because look at you. You don't have a beard. That's the crowning achievement of a man, is to have a beard. Now, my beard isn't that long, so maybe it would be better if it was
I don't know
if
a
I
bit.
didn't if I didn't trim it, and it got nice and long and bushy. Um, when you read stuff like that, and you're like, come on, who cares about that? But yeah, you're right. There are some things, hard sayings, you can call them, where you're like, oh, I don't know if I buy this. Or you have to think, well, how could this make sense? I mean, with the wife, kiss your wife and child, it's not that you don't love them. You do love them. That's precisely why you do that. But that wailing and crying and stuff like that is not really a sign that you love them. It's a sign that you love them, perhaps in the wrong way. So Epictetus wants to steer us towards a better form of it. But on its surface, when you read that passage from the Enchiridion, it seems very, very
Yeah.
harsh, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
But I think that's helped me a lot. You know, it gives extreme examples. Like there's one about him being beheaded and not complaining that someone else. But when you read these extreme examples, I'm not in a position where I'm being beheaded or anything like that. And I think in my head, I'm like, if he can have that mentality there, then I can do it just in my ordinary day-to-day life.
Yeah, when I have to, when the bus is late,
Yeah.
or when I have to have a meeting with somebody about finances that I'm not looking forward to, or something like that. Yeah.
You know, it says something. Maybe it's just my understanding, but I think is a bit out of character. Is about being the purple thread, and like
Oh,
like it seems quite like boastful.
well, it could, but one of the things that's in that, so it's in the book one of the discourses, is that the purple thread is making the rest of the garment beautiful. And it's doing so in a way that doesn't require the whole garment to become purple. So it could be a good example for how to, like a lot of people when they get into not just stoicism, but really any sort of mode of self-improvement, they're constantly talking about it, right? I mean, the old joke about uh what is it, like a vegan, a CrossFitter, and I forget who else it is, walk into a bar. How do you know? Because they tell you about it and
Yeah.
won't shut up about it, right? So there's all sorts of people who, if they're striving to be the purple thread, that's all they're going to talk about all the time. And Epictetus is, he doesn't want you to do that. Over and over again, he's like, hey, don't call yourself a philosopher, don't call yourself a stoic, just do the stuff you need to do. And hopefully down the line it'll show. So the purple thread within a society would be the person who acts with integrity when nobody else is. Yeah, that's sort of the example that he's giving. Everybody else is like, again, kissing the butt of the power center, and this other guy's like, hey, I'm going to go to the Senate. You can kill me if you want to, but I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do. Whereas everyone else is like, oh, you're a stupid person doing that. You should be prudent, get yourself out of town, have a nice vacation. So it all depends on how we read it, and I think a lot of times it's adding context, which I suppose to some people might strike them as, oh, you Stoics or you whatever, you just explain everything away. You've always got an answer for everything, but there just does happen to be an answer. So
Yeah.
you know,
But
what are you gonna do?
I was talking about this yesterday about parenting, and we were saying about like obviously it's better to be an example than just to say do this, do this. You being an example. Would you compare being a role model, being an example, to being that purple thread?
Yeah, and I would say if you're going to do that, you better make sure that you are the purple thread and not yellow or something, or that, you're not, if it rains, your purple isn't going to wash out right away if you
Yeah.
want to stand out. Yeah, I mean, as you're saying that about being a parent and telling your children to do something, or teachers are this way too. Um, Anytime you do that, there's a risk of that child saying, "But you don't behave that way." you know and so you almost need to make sure that you've got that down, and that's become established in yourself before you recommend it to somebody else. Otherwise you're being a hypocrite, and that tends to turn people off. If your goal is to get people, it could be anything. I mean, it could be like all of us need to get more healthy, and somebody could say, well, who are you to say that, fat ass? Look at you. And I do exercise, but I'm probably less in a position to give people advice about how exercise is an important component of their life or something like that. Um, so yeah, it's quite important. Or if like if I'm going to give people advice about their reading habits, I should probably be upfront that there's days that I don't read at all. I shouldn't be like, well, you must get an hour a day, and it must be edifying reading. None of this sloppy schlock stuff, sci-fi and fantasy, which I read. So yeah,
Yeah.
so if we're going to be role models, we have to be consistent before we're going to be believable. Otherwise, we're setting up the people who we're giving advice to for failure.
I hope you're enjoying today's talk with Gregory Sadler. A quick word for today's sponsor, Huel. Huel is a quick, affordable, nutritiously complete food with everything that your body needs. Huel has been very helpful in my life recently. I've been very busy with work, with my daughter, with personal life, the gym, that kind of thing. I've been very busy, and I always feel confident having Huel with me. It's so easy to just take it in my bag, and I know that just before my workout, I've got my energy drink to get me ready for the gym. I've got my protein that fuels me. I have my nice food that I know is healthy. It has everything my body needs, and it's tasty. And it just saves me. When you're on the go and you're busy, it's so easy to just go into a fast food place, go into a shop, just grab some cheap, sweet, sugary thing. But all these things add up. All these bad habits. The money adds up. The bad choices add up in too much sugar, too much unhealthy foods, and it all adds up. So I know if I just have my Huel with me, it cuts out that kind of path that I could go down. I just have my Huel with me, and I get to work, and that's what I eat, rather than nipping out to the shops to grab something unhealthy. I'm ready and fueled throughout the day. If you're interested in any Huel products, use code EverydayStoic10 for discount. The link will be in the description below. So let's get back into this talk with Gregory Sadler. I know you'll enjoy it, especially if you are a fan of Stoicism, because we talk a lot about Stoicism. Enjoy. Yeah, that's true, actually. One thing, just sticking to the idea of, say, philosophy for life, improving people's lives. Um,
Yeah.
if you could give, like, say the principles, for example, like the dichotomy of control or amor fati, just see as maybe small
Yeah.
quotes, principles, or insights. If if you could find someone, maybe the position I was in when I was 18, didn't know what to do,
Yeah.
I felt lost, felt weak. Is there a list or like three, four, five of these things that you would give to them that you'd say, follow these and it will get you in a good position, or it might even make you excel?
There's all sorts of lists of not just Stoic practices, but other ancient philosophy and medieval and even modern philosophy practices out there. And there's a lot of overlap too between them. So like the Platonists, the Epicureans, they have some things that the Stoics do, and there's borrowing back and forth. I think that I would be inclined, rather than giving somebody a full list, to start them off on a few. And if there are like passages that contextualize it, to give them those passages as well. Because one of the things that I've seen a lot of, and I've talked with John Sellers about this quite a bit in various interviews that we've done, like on our radio show and all that, is people adopting um, life hacks as if they're going to be effective. They will at first, right? Any single thing that you do that you're doing attentively will probably help you out. So it's just like dieting, you're going to lose weight with whatever diet you pick at first because you're actually paying attention to what you're eating. But many of these practices require, well, you apply them in this context, not all the time, right? So cold showers are not the answer to everything. Sometimes you shouldn't love your fate. There are times to say, well, this sucks, and I need to actually pursue justice instead. The dichotomy of control is incredibly complex in Epictetus's work. It's not just what's in um, Enchiridion 1 and Discourses 1:1. It's discussed throughout his entire work, and the what is in our control, what's not in our control, which are bad translations to begin with, um, are actually what he calls prolepses, or general conceptions that we have to gradually improve. So how do you do that? Well, part of it is like practice and trying it out and seeing what difference it makes. But it's also like, if you've got people who actually thought about this stuff a lot, why not read them? So when I do this sort of thing, I'm a philosophical counselor, and I've been doing that. It's actually coming up to my 10-year anniversary of being certified. Is that
Well done.
I assign readings and talk with the person, as well as giving them, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. And that winds up being a lot more helpful. And sometimes we'll do like, you could call it an after action report. So you tried this, how did it work? Where did it go wrong? You know, maybe you need to like also don't do this one, do this one in that case, you know? So I think that that can be quite helpful. But there are a lot of people, and you know, so before we actually got completely underway, you're talking about um, certain things in philosophy being liberating, and that there are things that people often just don't think about. And then you tell them that, and it helps take a weight off their shoulders, or it removes like a blinder or something like that. So it's natural, I think, especially for a lot of younger people, that they would look for, okay, what's the recipe? What's the list of things that I need to do? And there's lots of people out there to supply it. There's like a massive personal development, self-help, pick whatever you want, industry out there, just like throwing these things at you. And so helping people to realize that, yeah, okay, you start with something like that, and that's not your solution. That is just the doorway that you enter in, can be really, really helpful. But, you know, maybe people have to experiment a bit and try applying the dichotomy of control and screw it up a couple times and then be like, what the hell? This is supposed to fix things, right? And then you can be like, okay, so let's look at this now. How are you doing it? What more does Epictetus have to say about this? Then they're ripe for it. Sort of like what we were talking about before, you know, like if you tried telling me any of that sort of stuff when I was in my teens and 20s, I would have told you to screw off, that you were full of it. And, you know, only wimps do those sorts of things. You know? Now I'm ready for it.
Yeah, I think
Fortunately, it took you less time than me, I think.
yeah. Well, it took me quite a while, but I think it's a lot of these little principles that are maybe way too condensed. And I'm guilty of
Yeah.
myself. I'll sort of teach people things, or people ask for advice, I give it them, and my sort of reasoning behind that is, if someone said some of this stuff to me even 10 years ago, um,
Yeah.
I would just completely ignore them, because I'm like, oh, so I have to learn this Greek word, this Latin word. I have to like
Yeah.
I have to learn who this guy is. Whereas if they just give a principle or a simple thing,
Yeah.
then it gets me excited. And I think that's what I like, especially with the meditations. I'd read like one little like entry, and I did, after a week, I noticed my life, or like parts of my life, improved a little bit, where it got me excited to learn more. And then,
That's it. So you kind of dole it out, right? You don't throw, okay, how your life isn't going good. Here you go. Here's the entire Stoic library. You throw it in somebody's face. Read this stuff. Instead, you kind of drib it out a little bit here and there. And then when somebody's ready for more, you give them the more. When I'm doing presentations, I do a lot of stuff on anger management and you know, workplace things for businesses. And when I go in, they do not want to hear. So these ideas are coming from Aristotle and Epictetus and Seneca and Thomas Aquinas and blah blah blah, right? And you can find them in this text discussed in this way. They just want to hear like, how do I avoid my colleagues yelling at each other in the middle of meetings? And so you give them something, and then afterwards they'll come up to you and they'll be like, "Did you come up with that?" And you'd be like, "No, man, that's been around for 1,000 years or 2,000 years, and so said it. And if you want to know more about it, here's where you would go for that." And you can do similar things in one-on-one stuff. Somebody's like, "Oh man, I just went through." Think about like, what are the real things that bother us? Oh, I just lost my job, went through a bad breakup, somebody close to me died. Um, you know, you definitely aren't going to give them that Enchiridion 3 one. Well, you should have, you know, said they're mortal, you know, like a jug. So when it's broken, you're not upset. No, you give them something else. You know, like you give them Seneca's letter on grief, where he says, I'm not going to tell you not to grieve. Just don't grieve excessively. And here's how you can remember your friends in a way that allows you to enjoy them still being with you to some degree. And maybe you only give them that little passage, right? And then they're like, yeah, that was helpful for me. And then you're like, okay, here's the letter. And there's this guy Seneca, and maybe you'd like him, you know? I think that's the way to go in most cases. I mean, if you've got somebody who's already like interested in philosophy, great, give them the books, right? But like you're saying, most ordinary people are not hankering at, they're not saying, oh, my life is really incomplete. I haven't read Descartes' discourse on method.
Yeah, I think it's people also are looking for people such as yourself or people online to just go like, look in this direction. Because
Yeah.
yeah, it's like you said, I'm not going to walk into a library and go like, I don't know what to look for. I'm not going to get like Hume or Descartes when online. This is exactly why I read this book. Is I kept seeing it online. People saying you need to read this, need to read this. And now, yeah, I would be interested in these other philosophers. And it's actually when I was checking out your YouTube. It's got like I don't know how many years it would take me to watch every video, but now I'm interested in learning more about like Camus and Aristotle, Plato, like all of them. Yeah, just but that would have never started if I didn't just have that little like I think you said like open a doorway to it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's perfectly fine. Again, there's this sort of like philosophy done by the people on top, and then philosophy for the rest of us, where they're like, you must approach things in a systematic manner, and you can't skip any of the greats of philosophy. You know, uh, why not? I mean, none of us have actually read every philosopher, even if we just like, stop at like 1800 when it was kind of manageable. Very few people, I would say, who are scholars of ancient philosophy have read every text that's available in ancient philosophy, you know. So you find some things that you can say are intrinsically valuable for you, and those are the books that you go back to over and over again. Seneca even says this. He says you shouldn't have too many books, not just because you're never going to get to many of them and other people could read those books, but because you'll distract yourself, spreading yourself too thin over all of these works. So, you find something that at your point in your life, you can say experientially, I am getting value out of this. And then you read it. And then if there's references to, say, David Hume, I think David Hume is worth reading. And you have the time down the line, you go ahead and read him. But if you don't read him, it's not like your life doesn't have any value or meaning, or your relationships aren't good, or you're not doing good out there in the world. You could live your whole life without ever reading. Take a great one that people always want to tackle: Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. Oh, if I haven't read that, my intellectual development is not complete. Well, what do you think people were doing before Kant wrote the Critique of Pure Reason, right? were they saying, "Oh crap, philosophy, it's not good. We haven't read this book that hasn't been written yet." You could go your whole life without reading that, or Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, or all sorts of texts. And so long. I mean, what is the measure? Is your life something that is in general working out? Are you having decent relationships? Are you able to do work that you find interesting and productive, and maybe make some sort of difference in life to somebody? These are the things that really matter more than whether you've read a catalog of books. Now, if you've got the time to read those books, great, go ahead and do it. But I mean, Epictetus says this. He's got this thing about, so you can explain Chrysippus. Well, that's just because Chrysippus is hard to explain. Doesn't make you a better person because you can explain these books to somebody, any more than being able to lift a certain amount at the gym makes you a better person, or I don't know, being able to cook some famous, like making a good beef Wellington, something that my wife can do, but I don't know how to do. We joke about it a lot. Um, it's not that I'm not a good cook. I just don't know that dish.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, one thing, hopefully you have the answer here because it's something that has been interesting me a lot. Is in book one of discourses, it talks about, and this is just off the top of my head, I'm not very
Yeah.
well versed, but talking about Zeus giving a portion of self, and then Marcus Aurelius talks about the fragment of divinity, and then there's other quotes
Yeah.
about having God inside us, made in the image of God,
Yeah.
and um, I'm trying to. It's something that's really interesting me, and I'm trying to like kind of get a better understanding. I feel like that's all related.
Yeah, very much so. And I would say there's like three things you can draw out of Epictetus's discussion right away. One is he uses this metaphor. So if you've got a bit of God inside you, that means that you're making God do things. So when you go to the whorehouse, you are making God go into a brothel and copulate with prostitutes. Is that really what you want to do to God? So that's a good one right there. It shows us that we have a certain kind of responsibility. And then another one is that if this is the case, then this implies that all these social distinctions that we have, including power differentials like that between a free person and a slave, um, which a lot of people will say, well, you treat a slave like a slave, or in our time, it's not so much, except in some places, unfortunately, where there actually is still slavery. It's more like social prestige, or we differentiate between people on totally arbitrary characteristics like gender, race, or how much money you have in the bank, or things like that. If we all have the same portion of God within us, then we better treat people a lot better and not be the letter of James, I think some Bible things calls being a respecter of persons, meaning, kissing rich people's butts and treating poor people as if they're scum. So that's another really important implication there. And then, you could say that another thing that comes out of that discussion, Epictetus says you could complain to Zeus and be like, "Well, why didn't you give me more of that? Why am I so screwed up? Why do I have this body that makes me want to go off and eat more than I should, or have sex with people I shouldn't, or gets me in trouble in other ways?" And Zeus says, man, I did the best I could. You got this bit, the really good bit, and then you got this body, and bodies just work that way. What did you want from me? He doesn't say this exactly, but you get an idea that Zeus is saying, hey, just work with what you got, man. I've given you enough. And so I think those are three lessons that we can draw from it, all of which are very useful to us, like in every single day that we're living, because how many times a day are we tempted to think more highly of somebody or more lowly of somebody based on some arbitrary characteristic? And how often do we get discouraged by, our own bodies? And how often are we tempted to do things because we're like, well, nobody's watching, you know well, it's not like God is on your shoulder watching. God is in you, and you're going to make God do things. So if you're going to like yell at your kids because you lost your temper or something, well, you're making God do something shameful in that case. So it could be a useful deterrent to the bad action, I suppose.
Yeah, I like
And
that.
notice, like one passage, we can draw all that out of it.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah, I like how you're saying like it kind of does make us equal because we all have that
Mm.
fragment of divinity. The one like understanding I was trying to um, get from it, and it's like it kind of helped me. Maybe my understanding was wrong, but I was thinking of like that divine fragment, that part of God that you've got is
Yeah.
within your control. It's like your character in a way.
Right.
So, like the way I see it is like if you focus on that part rather than these externals and like what people would say is bad, then I feel like that's like in a way living in accordance with nature. Like it's a good path to go down.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to do is to learn to value externals with the amount of value that they have. So it's not like they're bad in themselves. They're not. They're indifference. And we can use indifference prudently or justly or courageously, right? I mean, so money, for example, not something that's in my control. All of our money could disappear tomorrow. I mean, most of it is basically stored in computers, and I'm not talking about Bitcoin or stuff. I'm talking about our bank accounts. Those go down, we're screwed, Um, but that doesn't mean that I should be imprudent in how I spend my money. So just to take a really prosaic example, My wife and I are both very, very busy people. And there is this temptation which we followed for a while of um, ordering meals too often, right? We'd get close to the end of the day and we'd be like, well, we've got this meal planned, but we're out of time. Let's just get a pizza or let's get Mexican or something like that. And no one single instance of that is bad. As a matter of fact, it might be a good thing to do. Like, it's a special occasion. Let's order in. But you don't want that to become what you're doing all the time because and it's not that it's unjust. You're not like destroying the environment. I mean, you're actually helping people because you're paying them money to bring you food, but it's imprudent and it's probably intemperate too. It's not good for you to be eating takeout all the time. It's too fatty, there's too much salt and stuff like that. So it's not conducive to your health, especially if you're an older person like myself where you gotta watch that. So that's an indifferent, right? But we can decide whether we're spending our money on that or whether we're saving it for retirement or to buy books or things like that. Um, so it still remains an external and indifferent, but that inner core of you, to go back to what you're talking about, which is, that little bit of God, that's what you use to make the other things go right. Or if you don't do that, they're going to go wrong inevitably. So, but the other thing I'll say too, the part of us that we have control over, it it's not just that we have control over it as if we're like on top of that part is us. So we have control over ourselves, or that part, the proiresis in Epictetus's case, which is the same thing as the rational part, as the ruling part in Epictetus, quite arguably. It's what we call reflexive, to use a technical term, which means that it bears upon itself. So it can, he's got that passage like, does the art of grammar tell you, how to use it? No, the rational faculty tells you that. So, because we have this part of, as Epictetus says, God within ourselves, that's what enables us to be so much more than like a robot or an algorithm or even an animal that doesn't have that kind of um, self-control and rationality and capacity. And by the way, there's a totally uh, um, digressive topic. That's something that's kind of up for debate within the modern Stoic community. How should we look at animals? Are they really totally beasts, irrational, or do at least some of the higher ones, like the apes and cetaceans and elephants and very, very intelligent animals, do they participate in that rationality to a certain extent? I'm inclined to say yes. Um, but there's a lot of debate going on about that. So yeah, but I don't want to lead us too far afield, especially since I want to be respectful of your time since I know it's probably getting a little late over there by you.
Yeah, it's not too late, but yeah, it's interesting, and I feel like that's the problem with these talks. I feel like I could go on for hours hearing more, but then you have to constrain it, especially like technology starts to shut down after a certain amount of time, data fills up.
I'll go off on another complete digression. So you mentioned Donald Robertson, and you probably should interview him at some time.
Yeah,
However, when you do, and I'll just give you this little bit of advice, and it works not just for Donald, but for other people who are similar, where they can just talk forever because they're a wealth of knowledge and they're very difficult to get out of a conversation with. You want to make sure that you have something lined up by the time that you want to stop, so you can say, "Okay, I've got to go now," because
yeah,
I did an interview with him and we even had an internet interruption in the middle of it. So we didn't even have all of it. And usually my interviews with people go an hour and a half tops. The published interview was 2 hours and 15 minutes.
yeah,
And by the end of it, I was like, okay, we're going to have to wrap this up. And he could have gone on, I think, probably for 5 hours. He's just a, great public speaker and it just has like a wealth of stuff in his head. Um, some people are like that, Others, 50 minutes is like their limit and they've exhausted everything that they got for you, right?
Well, I feel like you would be like that. If I asked a question about Descartes or Hume, I feel like you would go on for ages. But unfortunately, like life has to happen outside of the talk. But I mean, it would be good. I've got loads of things I'd love to ask you, just because like there's questions where I might search them online, like the one about the fragment or the purple thread. I'll search online,
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
and I'm not finding an answer, or I'll try to get the answer myself, but I'm like, oh, what if I'm wrong? What? So like it's these things that are stuck in my head, and I can't off the top of my head. After this talk, I'll be like, oh, why didn't I ask this? But it's good to just like,
The beauty of the internet is you can always come back, right?
yeah,
I mean, we have like unlimited storage. It's not like old-fashioned books where you've got, so many pages and you better get it done in that. If you want to do another interview down the line, we certainly can.
oh yeah, that would be good. So you had a video. I have never watched this, but you said it's about 10 books you would take to a desert island.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, could you just a short in time, three or maybe five,
Oh,
but
three from those books?
yeah, 3 books, and just, like explain why, I guess.
Yeah, and I also say you can't cheat and have like the collected works of
Right.
books, right? Because
Yeah.
otherwise you might be saying, like I'll take Plato's dialogues. I mean, that's like 30 books. Yeah, that's a good question. So it's interesting. I don't think I would take Hegel's phenomenology, which I was working on at the time, and I did the whole half-hour Hegel thing because I'm kind of done with that, and I don't think I get as much enjoyment. Really, for the books on the island, you want books because you may be there the rest of your life that are going to hold your attention, but you really enjoy reading, right? So that is a tough one. I mean, I would say Epictetus's discourses. Um, I still get a lot out of it rereading it, and it's a nice, meaty, thick book. Um, who else? If we're talking just philosophy books, um, maybe I would pick Plato's Republic because there's a
Yeah.
lot there. It's a long book. There's lots of cool thoughts to think over again and again. And then, what's a good long one? Um, I'll take one kind of out of left field. Um, Schopenhauer's World is Will and Representation, because it's been a while since I've read it, and there's a lot of very interesting stuff in there
Yeah.
that I'm kind of hazy about because it's been long enough that I haven't read it, and it's a big, thick book. That's part of what you want because you're going to be God knows how long on that island. So if I had to pick three, that might be, and some people hearing that will be, well, why didn't you pick this one? Why didn't you pick? Well, we're just coming up with these off the top of my head.
Yeah,
So,
I'm surprised you said Epictetus, and one of your videos you're saying how much you like Epictetus. What is it about Epictetus that you are drawn to?
well, I suppose um, part of it is probably you could say autobiographical. I had read Epictetus's Enchiridion as an undergraduate, and I was like, oh, okay, I get where this is coming from, and I didn't know that there were the discourses. Because again, my philosophical background was pretty poorly formed by my professors, who kind of didn't care. And so I ran across it in a used bookstore well, I was in graduate school, and I was very interested in freedom of the will and how we shape our character and stuff like that. And I picked it up, and I was like, Epictetus's discourses. What is this? And it was a really old translation. So I start reading it through, and I'm like, holy crap! This is really, not just interesting, but this is like the kind of stuff I'm into. And he's got some cool things to say. I got to get this. I think I still have a copy of it around somewhere. And So, that initial excitement, I think I never really truly lost that. And then, you got Marcus Aurelius, you got Seneca, you've got Epictetus is sort of like the top tier of late Stoic literature. I just like Epictetus better than those other two guys, although Seneca's growing on me. Epictetus is much more systematic than Marcus Aurelius, understandably so, right? He's got more time on his hands. He doesn't have to run an empire. I mean, I'm not faulting Marcus for that. Um, and I do like Seneca, but there's something about Epictetus and the way that he talks about stuff. He talks very little about virtue. He talks much more about all sorts of other things, like how we're using our mind and using our faculties. He does talk a lot about character, but he doesn't go on about the virtues that much. Um, so yeah, he's always been my favorite of the Stoics, and probably always will.
Yeah,
It might also be, I can kind of relate to. So Seneca has got a soft touch with things. You know, Epictetus is much more in your face. He's willing to tell people, "Wow, you're really off base, man." He'll even call people slave as a form of like shaking them up. And I think I can kind of relate to that in my earlier incarnation as kind of a jerk, but not a jerk in the way that Epictetus isn't a jerk. Epictetus is just in your face, right? But there's something about that like very open, you know, what the hell are you thinking, man? Kind of thing
yeah,
I like. So, and actually, I need that sort of thing myself. Again, at the risk of going on too far, one of the best bits of advice that I ever got in my life happened when I was around 16. And it was somebody I was upset with the way that I was being treated while I was in a juvenile detention facility. And the staff member said, act like an asshole, get treated like an asshole. And it was like a revelation for me. Well, if you behave in this way, there's consequences to that. If you don't want those consequences, stop behaving like that and see how it gets you. Epictetus would say something like that, I think. Whereas I don't think Seneca would.
yeah. One thing, Seneca, I was really put off Seneca for years because I felt like he was phony. And I feel like a lot of people get that same impression. Just
Yeah.
understanding his position he was in life and what his roles were, and then he's preaching his stuff.
Yeah.
I just felt like, yeah, I'm going to stick to Epictetus and Aurelius, even though people might say Aurelius is phony as well. Who is he? He's emperor. But I already knew his backstory, so I was like,
Yeah, but I mean, think about what being an emperor is like. You got to put up with so many people's BS. I mean, that passage that starts there's the gratitude chapter, and I don't really pay much attention to that. I think it basically starts in book two. And the very first thing in book two is, hey, when you wake up in the morning, you're going to meet a whole bunch of jerks, and they're going to be a whole bunch of different kind of jerks. They're not all going to be the same jerk. And he's the emperor. So, even the emperor can't get away from people who are a pain in the rear.
yeah,
And with
that,
Seneca too, you could say he's a rich guy, sure, but he had to work for Nero.
yeah.
And when he wanted to retire, Nero wasn't going to let him. And then how does he die? Well, these other people have a revolt against Nero, and he gets thrown in with them and told, hey, you're going to kill yourself. And if he doesn't kill himself, what's going to happen? Nero will kill his whole family, and everybody associated with him. So it's not really a picnic to be Seneca.
Yeah, I think it comes from more understanding. Like I started learning more about Seneca, and I was like, oh, this makes sense. And I do like his writing as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I really wanted to talk to you about anger management because I've seen a lot. You've
Well,
done.
I'll just say this. The reason why I got into studying anger management is because I struggled with anger so much as an adolescent and then into my 20s and even early 30s. And I was just amazed at the resources that were available in ancient philosophy for understanding and lessening and managing your anger, not just from the Stoics, but from the Aristotelians, the Platonists, even the Epicureans. There's all sorts of really great stuff in there that oftentimes is better than what the contemporary psychologists have to give us. So,
Okay, right. So I'll just ask you one last thing, seeing as
Okay.
uh, the idea, and I would like to talk about anger management, but I guess I feel like that would be an hour or more. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I'd like to just seeing the idea is just to hopefully the viewer gets an understanding of your personal philosophy or philosophical ideas that you think could help their life. People are drawn to like we were saying earlier, just like a not a snippet, but one thing they can sort of latch onto. It's an introduction into maybe how you think about the world, how you think about what it means to be a good person. Maybe if that's what something you subscribe to, what would you say is your personal philosophy?
Well, I think that one significant part of it that I share with many other people, and you brought up earlier, is the fact that we don't have to have complete control over ourselves. Nobody does, right? Anybody who thinks that they do, that's crazy talk. But we have the possibility for like changing this little bit here or this little bit here. And it happens through how we prioritize things and the choices we make. And that can be very scary for a lot of people, which is often why they want to hide it away from themselves. But it can also be very liberating, realizing that I don't have to be the same way that I've been as far as I can remember, if I don't like this aspect of myself, or I am finding that this aspect of myself gets me in trouble with other people. I do like the aspect, but it's causing me grief or ruining my relationships. I can change that, and that philosophy, understood as a way of life, has all sorts of insights and techniques, and you could even say tests for how we're succeeding or failing for doing that. Um, so, is that I don't I don't know where you'd say this comes from. It's certainly not my insight. I think it's been around since time of Plato and Aristotle and the early Stoics. But it's very valuable, and learning that for a lot of people comes as a kind of revelation that allows them to um, take control of a life that they've been told they can't take control over, you know?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And just
And again, not mine. So yeah,
yeah,
it is my life philosophy in the sense that I live it out, but I've it's totally taken from other people. So maybe that could be another thing too. You don't have to come up like anything with anything original of your own. That's your life philosophy, because there's so many other people who are probably smarter than us who have come up with great stuff in the past. So
I think that's the way I've always
that takes a
seen
little
it.
pressure off too, right?
Yeah, like for yourself, you've studied so much philosophy. Me just asking you questions, you've got a better understanding. And so, like, I could just ask you a question, get the answer, or I could spend like a year trying to read it all. And sometimes it is just good to ask, I guess, ask questions and learn from others. That's what I got from Marcus Aurelius. The first chapter is sort of giving thanks to all these people. I feel like he
Yeah, yeah.
was always open to learning from everyone around him.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay, just for myself, because I want to, I feel like you're the perfect person to ask. Is I'm looking to learn more philosophy, mainly Stoicism, because I'm just so interested in Stoicism at the moment. Could you recommend maybe a few books that you think I wouldn't have read?
Oh, like not primary text, but like secondary contemporary literature on it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So, if you like something that's a bit academic-y, but I think is written quite well, Margaret Graver has a really wonderful book on Stoicism and emotion, where she's like piecing together the texts from across the entire Stoic tradition. And she's also at certain points willing to say, yeah, this doesn't completely make sense. Here's where the Stoics might be problematic, but here's some ways of thinking about it. Um, let's see. I mean, John Sellers has a number of really good, accessible books about Stoicism. So he's a good one too. I like, he's a good friend, but also a great writer. So he's somebody I would recommend. Uh, and he's actually Graver I think is over here, although I think she's English. But Stellers is over there by you,
Yeah.
and speaks at public events, so you can very easily see him.
Yeah, I've planned to actually have a talk with him. We're just trying to arrange that, so I'm glad you said that because I'm quite excited now.
Yeah, he's a good interview guest. I can say that. And then if you want something that is challenging and is part of what got like the whole modern stoicism thing going, it is tough. I've worked through it with clients, but it's rewarding. Lawrence Becker's A New Stoicism. And I would skip some of the stuff in the back that nobody actually reads. He's got like this whole logic of, decision making, which is very complicated, but he's got other stuff on the way. So here's what he does. He says the Stoic school effectively disappeared in the Middle Ages and then was resuscitated kind of in the Renaissance and early modern period. And it's only now that it's being taken seriously again. What if it hadn't disappeared? What if it had stuck around this entire time? Would Stoicism look different? I'm going to give you a picture of what that would look like. Now, the
Sounds
trouble with
interesting.
that book is he doesn't give you a lot of examples. It is a bit dry, but you'd probably, find it not just challenging, but also rewarding to read.
Oh, thank you for that. I've got something.
Sure.
I mean, my reading list is already a bit backed up, but you know,
Yeah, I know
it's
the
always
feeling.
But, thank you so much for talking today. I, uh,
Sure.
I really enjoyed this, and I feel like I've learned quite a bit. It's kind of opened
Yeah, I've enjoyed it too.
it's opened like Pandora's box to learn more. When I was looking at your YouTube channel, I was like, there's a lot to learn, and but I've enjoyed today, and it's been good.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation, and I
Is
look forward to more.
is there anything you want me to link, plug, or anything you want to say?
Well, I will say this, and I don't have the link ready for it yet. I've started offering for the public online classes in my Study with Sadler Academy. And right now I've got one that's actually enrolling on philosophy of friendship that's beginning very soon, which if people want, if they want to jump in, they can. But I've got one coming up that will start running on Saturdays near the end of February, which is a 6-week class, Stoicism and the Cardinal Virtues. So we're going to do deep dives into the Stoic literature and look at, okay, what does justice actually look like as represented by, Seneca and Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and Musonius, but also by these other authors who are telling us about it. We're going to do that for each of the 4 cardinal virtues. We're going to talk about problems with the Stoic conception of virtue, namely that like it's like an off-on switch. You're either virtuous or you're vicious. Can that really work?
Yeah,
And it's going to be 90-minute class sessions every week for the duration of it, and I give people resources and stuff. So there's that coming out, and I've always got new things happening in the YouTube channel and various other places. But I mean, the good news is if people want to find me, all they have to do is type Gregory Sadler into Google, and because I've done so much, I'm on the top results, and
yeah.
it sucks for every other Gregory Sadler out there, you know.
But yeah, that the virtue class, the class you're on about, actually sounds super interesting. It sounds like something I would be super interested in. So,
Yeah.
I'll,
Well, I'll be having announcements about it coming out in the next few weeks or so.
oh, great. Well, I'll make sure to link that, and make sure people are pointed in the right direction.
Okay, sounds good.
Right, Greg. Thank you very much for today. I really enjoyed
Oh,
it.
you're very welcome.
I hope you enjoyed today's talk with Gregory Sadler. I certainly did, and I wish I could have gone on longer. Unfortunately, there is a life that goes on outside of this podcast, and I had a time frame that I had to stay within. But You know, we've got it planned for other talks. I'm definitely, next time I talk to Greg, I'm definitely going to niche down on a specific subject, because he's an expert in many subjects, and I want to kind of pick his brain on his expertise. So maybe leave a comment below what you would like me to talk about next time. But also, if you have any questions about today's podcast, leave a comment below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible with the best answer I can give. And if there's anything for Greg, I can send those questions over to him and get his answer. For everyone in the States and in Canada, my book, The Everyday Stoic, Simple Rules for a Good Life, is available for pre-order, and it's still available for pre-order in the UK. And I know many of you are ordering it, and I'm very thankful. I hope you enjoy it. I know it will be very helpful to all of you. It is, I think, a very good guide to becoming the best version of yourself using Stoic principles that have helped me over a decade from being someone that was shy, scared, felt weak. I felt like the world was a rubbish place and I was downtrodden. And I'm a completely different person. I don't even remember that person. And that was using these rules, these principles of Stoicism, but I've explained it in a way using personal stories, personal anecdotes, that I think will be very understandable to you, and hopefully after you've finished reading that book, your life will look quite different. And if you're interested in any Huel products, use code EverydayStoic10 for discount. The link will be in the description below. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
So you have like different, depending on what type of emotion it is. Yeah? In the Buddhist practices, for example, you have sometimes metta meditation. So it is like meditating upon a certain quality, meditating upon a certain quality. For example, compassion. For example, mercy. For example, healing. Okay, so